Story 1. I live in a small town just outside of Alice Springs. It's a quiet life. Nothing much happens here. Most people pass through on their way somewhere else. My name's Rob, and I work odd jobs, fixing bikes, tuning engines, that sort of thing. I guess I've always had a thing for machines. You can trust machines. They're predictable. People? Not so much. One winter night, I decided to take my old Yamaha out for a long ride. I wasn't heading anywhere specific, just south, towards the South Australian border. It was one of those nights when the world feels empty. No cars, no towns, just the road stretching out endlessly. The sky was pitch black, no moon, no clouds, just stars, millions of them. It was beautiful in a way, but also unnerving. You feel small under a sky like that. The cold was brutal. Even with my gloves on, my hands were freezing. Every now and then, I had to stop and warm them on the engine. The first time I pulled over, I killed the engine and turned off the lights. That's when it hit me, the sheer blackness. Without the bike's light, I couldn't see a thing. The stars were the only clue where the sky ended and the ground began. It was the kind of darkness that makes you question if anything else exists. I stood there for a minute, just listening. Nothing. Not even wind. It was like the world had stopped. I'll admit, it spooked me a little. I jumped back on the bike, fired it up, and kept riding. After that, I left the engine and lights on whenever I stopped. It felt safer somehow. Around 2 a.m., I pulled over again. My hands were stiff, almost numb. I left the bike running, like I said, and leaned down to press my gloves against the warm engine casing. The heat was a relief, but I kept looking over my shoulder. There was no reason to. I was alone out there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't. Then I heard it, a faint sound just above the hum of the engine. At first I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. It was more like a whisper, soft and rhythmic. I straightened up and turned around, scanning the darkness. The bike's headlights stretched out into the void, illuminating the asphalt and a patch of desert scrub. Nothing moved. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded small and thin against the vast silence. No response. I told myself it was just my imagination. Hours of riding in the cold can mess with your head. But when I turned back to the bike, I saw it, a shadow. It flickered just outside the beam of the headlight, quick as a blink. I froze. My first thought was that it was an animal, a kangaroo or a dingo maybe, but it wasn't. It was tall, upright, and human-shaped. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The shadow didn't move. It just stood there, at the edge of the light, as if it were waiting. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached for the throttle, ready to take off, but I couldn't look away. Then it stepped forward. I can't describe it properly. It was like it wasn't entirely there, like parts of it were flickering in and out of existence. Its face, or what should have been a face, was blank. Just smooth darkness, like the night itself had taken form. I panicked. I jumped on the bike and twisted the throttle hard. The engine roared and the headlights swung as I turned back onto the road. I didn't care where I was going. I just wanted to get away. But as I sped off, I saw it again. In the mirrors. It was following me. No, running after me. And it was fast. Faster than anything I'd ever seen. I gunned it, the engine screaming as I pushed the bike to its limits. The landscape blurred and the cold air stung my face. But no matter how fast I went, it stayed with me, always just at the edge of the light. Then the engine sputtered. "No, no, no," I shouted, twisting the throttle. But it was no use. I'd run out of fuel. The bike coasted to a stop, the headlights still shining weakly. I jumped off, my legs shaky, and turned to face the darkness. The shadow was gone. For a moment, I thought I was safe. I even laughed, a nervous, shaky sound. But then the whispering started again. This time it was louder. It came from all around me, circling like a predator. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. And then, out of the darkness, it stepped into the light. Closer now, I could see it wasn't a shadow. It was something else entirely, something wrong. Its body twisted and shifted, like smoke trapped in a human shape. It reached out, and I swear I felt the air ripple around me. I don't remember much after that. When I came to, it was morning. The bike was lying on its side, the engine cold. My gloves were gone, and my hands were raw and blistered, like I'd been clawing at something. I walked to the nearest road sign and found out I was over 50 kilometers from where I'd stopped. To this day, I have no idea how I got there. I don't ride at night anymore. Story 2. I don't think I'll ever drive through southeast Turkey at night again. Not after what happened last summer. My name is Cem, and I live in Istanbul. I'm a truck driver by trade, and my job often takes me across the country. I've seen all sorts of places, from the bustling streets of Izmir to the isolated roads near the Syrian border. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I experienced on that stretch of road near Şanlıurfa. It was late, around 1 a.m., and I was driving through the barren lands of the southeast. If you've never been there, let me tell you, it's nothing like the Turkey most people picture. There are no sprawling forests or green hills here, just miles of dry, empty land that looks more like the Middle East than Europe. The road was dead quiet, not another car or truck in sight. I'd been driving for hours and the silence was starting to mess with me. I was hauling a load of construction supplies to a site near the border. My GPS told me I had about 3 more hours to go, and honestly, I couldn't wait to get there. Driving at night in that part of the country always gave me the creeps, but the pay was good, so I sucked it up. The thing is, there's no real civilization out there. You drive for miles without seeing so much as a gas station. It's just you, the road, and the stars. Usually I'd have the radio on to keep me company, but the signal had been cutting out, so I turned it off. That's when I noticed something strange. I can't say exactly when I first saw them. Maybe it was a mile back, maybe more. At first I thought my tired mind was playing tricks on me. There were figures standing by the side of the road, just standing there. I slowed down a little, thinking maybe they were travelers or locals. But the closer I got, the more I realized something was off. They weren't moving, just standing in the shadows, barely illuminated by my headlights. I couldn't make out their faces, but I could feel their eyes on me. I sped up, thinking I'd pass them quickly and be done with it. But a few miles down the road, there they were again. Or maybe it was different people, I don't know. Same eerie stillness, same blank stares. I swear it felt like they were waiting for me. My chest tightened. This wasn't normal. I gripped the wheel tighter and kept driving, trying to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe some locals messing around, maybe just my imagination. But deep down, I didn't believe that. A few more miles and I saw them again. This time, they were closer to the road. Too close. I could see their outlines more clearly now. Men, women, even a child. Their clothes were dark and nondescript, blending into the night. None of them moved, not even a twitch. Just those damn stares. My heart was pounding by now. I didn't know what to do. I thought about stopping, but something inside me screamed not to. Whatever they weren't normal. I could feel it in my gut. I floored the gas pedal, desperate to put as much distance between me and them as possible. My truck roared as it picked up speed, and for a moment, I felt a little relief. But then I saw them again. They were ahead of me this time, standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. The truck came to a halt just a few feet away from them. My hands were shaking as I stared at them through the windshield. There were 5 of them now, all lined up in a row. The child was in the middle, clutching what looked like a doll. "Who the hell are you?" I muttered, though I knew they couldn't hear me. And then they moved. Not all at once, but slowly, like they were floating rather than walking. They spread out, circling my truck. My breath caught in my throat as I watched them disappear into the shadows on either side. I locked the doors, my mind racing. Should I call the police? Would they even believe me? I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping on the driver's side window. My head snapped to the left, and there she was. A woman, her face pale and expressionless. Her eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. I don't remember much after that. Pure panic took over. I threw the truck into gear and hit the gas, not caring if I hit anyone. The truck jolted forward, and for a second, I thought I heard a scream, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, there was nothing. No people, no shadows, just an empty road. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town. To this day, I don't know what I saw out there. People, spirits, something else entirely. All I know is I'm never driving that road again. Story 3. I'm not usually one to scare easy, but what happened to me on Route 17 in South Carolina is something I still can't explain. My name's Jason, and I live in Charleston. This happened about 2 years ago when I was driving back home from visiting my folks in Raleigh. It was late fall and the days were getting shorter. I was on a solo road trip back down south, cruising along the highway. I had started the drive late in the afternoon, and by the time I hit South Carolina, the sun was long gone. There wasn't much traffic, just the hum of my engine and the rhythmic sound of tires rolling over asphalt. At around 9 p.m., I started seeing deer. Not one or two, but clusters of them grazing near the side of the road. Their eyes caught the beams of my headlights, glowing like tiny green orbs in the dark. I slowed down, heart pounding a little harder every time one darted closer to the edge of the highway. I've heard the stories. Hitting a deer at highway speed is no joke. I debated pulling over at the next town to find a motel, but I wasn't tired. I was actually making good time and thought I could push through. That was until I saw the first dead deer. It was lying just off the shoulder, twisted and mangled, as if it had been hit hard. Not unusual for this area, I told myself. Happens all the time. But as I kept going, there was another one, then another. Within 5 minutes, I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The roadside was littered with carcasses. Deer, dozens of them, scattered like fallen leaves. Some were fresh, their blood shining wet under my headlights. Others were older, their bodies stiff and discolored. I slowed to a crawl, trying to make sense of it, but there was no pattern. They were just everywhere. I told myself it was just bad luck. Maybe a bunch of them had wandered into the road and caused some chain reaction of accidents. But it wasn't just the deer. Something felt wrong. The air was heavier, and the darkness outside seemed thicker than before. About a mile later, I saw movement up ahead, a deer standing in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes and stopped about 20 feet away. My headlights lit up its body, but it wasn't moving. It just stood there, staring straight at me. "Move, damn it," I muttered under my breath. It didn't budge. I honked the horn, the sound blaring through the still night. The deer tilted its head slightly, as if it was listening, but it didn't move. Something about it made my skin crawl. Its eyes didn't reflect the light like the others had. They were dark, empty, almost like holes. I shifted the car into reverse, but before I could back up, the deer jerked its head toward the woods on the left. It was a sharp, unnatural movement, like a puppet on a string. Then it bolted off the road and disappeared into the trees. I sat there, heart racing, trying to decide what to do. The road ahead was clear, but I didn't want to move. Something told me I shouldn't, and then I heard it. A loud thud came from behind me, followed by a scraping noise along the roof of my car. I froze, gripping the steering wheel so tight my palms began to sweat. It sounded like something heavy had landed on top of me. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. The sound shifted, moving from the back of the car to the front. Slow, deliberate, whatever it was crawling. I reached for my phone, but my hands were shaking so bad I dropped it onto the passenger seat. My breath was coming in short, sharp gasps, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Then, as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. The silence was deafening. I sat there unable to move, waiting for something, anything to happen. My headlights still illuminated the empty stretch of road ahead, but the woods on either side seemed to close in. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually I worked up the nerve to move. Slowly I put the car in drive and started to inch forward. That's when I saw it. Standing at the edge of the trees, right where the deer had disappeared, was something. At first I thought it was another deer, but as my headlights swept over it, I realized it wasn't. It was taller, its limbs too long, its body too thin. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its eyes. God, its eyes, they weren't deer eyes. They weren't human either. It didn't move, just stood there watching me. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped past it, not daring to look back. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely keep the car on the road. When I finally reached a gas station about 30 miles down the road, I pulled in and parked under the bright fluorescent lights. I sat there for a while, engine running, trying to catch my breath. The attendant inside gave me a strange look when I walked in, probably because I was pale as a ghost. I didn't say much, just grabbed a coffee and sat at one of the tables near the window. I didn't see any more deer that night, dead or alive. I don't know what I saw on that road, and I'm not sure I want to, but I'll tell you this. If you're ever driving through the Carolinas at night and see a stretch of road littered with dead deer, turn around. Whatever's out there, it's not something you want to meet. Story 4. My name's Jake, and I'm a delivery driver based out of Richmond, Virginia. I've been driving for years now, and I've seen my fair share of weird things on the road. Drunk drivers, strange wildlife, even the occasional UFO-looking drone. I'm not the type to scare easily, but something happened a few years back that I still can't explain. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. It was around 3:30 in the morning, and I was heading south on I-81. I'd been driving for about 10 hours straight, running on coffee and sheer stubbornness. The road was dead quiet, which wasn't unusual for that time of night, but it always felt eerie when I was the only set of headlights cutting through the dark. The fog that night was the worst I'd ever seen, thick rolling patches that seemed to swallow everything in front of me. One minute I could see a quarter mile ahead, the next I was driving blind, the high beams doing nothing but lighting up the mist. I remember coming out of one of those fog patches and the road ahead looked wrong. It wasn't wet from rain, but the asphalt was shiny, almost reflective. At first I thought it was just some weird trick of the light or maybe an oil spill. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't oil. The road was streaked in deep red, like blood. I slowed down, my stomach dropping. It was everywhere, covering the lanes and stretching as far as my headlights could reach. I thought, did I just drive through a massive animal hit? Maybe someone had hit a deer or a whole pack of them and not stopped. But there were no bodies, no fur, no broken glass, just the blood. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel, trying to make sense of it. The smell hit me next, coppery, thick, like a butcher's shop. It seeped into the cab of my truck, turning my stomach. I reached for my phone to take a picture, to have proof of whatever the hell I was seeing. But just as I unlocked the screen, another wall of fog came down over me like a curtain. The road disappeared, and I was back in that suffocating white void. I slowed to a crawl, my pulse pounding in my ears. I was half convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was just overtired, and my brain was playing tricks on me. But then my tires hit something. Not just a bump, something soft, something that gave under the weight of the truck. My heart jumped into my throat. What was that? I wanted to stop, to check what I'd run over, but everything in me screamed not to. I kept going, inching through the fog, until finally I broke through to clear air again. I looked in my mirrors, but there was nothing behind me. No sign of blood, no roadkill, nothing. The smell, though, it stuck. It clung to me, to the cab, as if I'd driven through something that didn't want to let go. I cranked the window down, gagging, hoping the fresh air would help. That's when I saw it. A figure, standing on the side of the road, just barely in the glow of my taillights. They were too tall, their arms too long, their head tilted at an unnatural angle. They didn't move, didn't wave, didn't make any sign that they were real. They just stood there watching as I sped away. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just drove faster than I should have until I hit the next rest stop. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely shift into park. When I finally got out to check my truck, I almost wished I hadn't. There were streaks of red smeared up the sides of the tires, like something or someone had reached out and grabbed hold. I quit that route the next day. Story 5. My name's Kevin, and I've lived in the same small town in rural Louisiana my whole life. There's not much here, just miles of swamp and back roads that twist and turn into the middle of nowhere. It's the kind of place where people know each other's business, and nothing exciting ever happens. At least that's what I thought until one night about 2 years ago. I worked the late shift at a gas station on the edge of town, and that night I'd stayed a little longer to help my buddy close up. It was around 2 a.m. by the time I hopped into my truck and headed home. The road I take is pretty isolated, one of those old country roads lined with trees so thick they block out the moonlight. If your headlights go out, you're basically blind. The drive started off like any other. The radio was on low, and the road stretched ahead like a black ribbon. After about 10 minutes, the trees seemed to press in closer, and the air felt different, heavy. I turned the radio off without really thinking about it. A couple of minutes later, I saw something red flash through the corner of my eye. It was so quick I thought I imagined it, a weird reflection or something. But then, just as I was about to dismiss it, this red car came shooting out of the trees to my left. I slammed on the brakes so hard my truck skidded sideways, tires screaming against the asphalt. My heart was pounding, and my hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I was bracing for the crash, but it didn't happen. The car didn't even slow down. It flew across the road like it didn't give a damn about me, or the fact that there was no road where it was headed. I sat there stunned as the car disappeared into the thick bamboo on the other side. It didn't swerve, it didn't bounce or stop. It just vanished into the stalks like they weren't even there. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the spot where it went in, waiting to see something, anything. But there was nothing. No sound, no headlights, no busted branches. After what felt like an eternity, I got out of the truck. My legs were shaky as hell, but I had to know what just happened. I grabbed my flashlight from under the seat and pointed it at the bamboo. It was untouched. Not a single stalk was bent or broken. The ground wasn't disturbed either. No tire tracks, no sign that anything had been there at all. It didn't make sense. I walked to the edge of the road and scanned the trees on the other side, but they were just as undisturbed. I even called out, though I don't know what I expected. Maybe someone yelling back, "It's a prank!" Or at least the sound of an engine fading into the distance. But there was nothing. Just silence. That's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. You know that feeling you get when someone's watching you? Like there's a pair of eyes you can't see, boring into you? That's what it felt like, except worse. I swung the flashlight around, trying to catch whatever it was. My hand was shaking so bad the beam bounced all over the place. I didn't see anything, but the feeling wouldn't go away. And then, I swear, I heard something. A faint rustling, like someone moving through the bamboo. I didn't wait to see what it was. I bolted back to the truck, jumped in, and locked the doors. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out so fast my tires kicked up gravel. I didn't stop driving until I was back in town. Even then, I didn't go straight home. I parked in front of the diner and sat there with all the lights on, trying to make sense of what just happened. But here's the thing, I couldn't. There was no logical explanation, no reason for a car to appear out of nowhere, cross a road and vanish into thin air. I don't know what I saw that night, and honestly, I don't want to know. Because whatever that was, it wasn't normal, and I'm not sticking around to find out. Story 6. My name's Elena. My husband Mark and I live in a quiet little town just north of the city. It's not the kind of place you'd expect anything unusual to happen. Just a sleepy suburb surrounded by woods and a few winding roads. Our routine's simple. On weekends, we go for early morning walks in a nearby park. It's a peaceful, woodsy place, the kind where you might spot a deer if you're quiet enough. One Saturday morning in late fall, we set out early, just as the sun was starting to rise. There's this road leading to the park, narrow and curvy, flanked by tall trees on both sides. It's always a little eerie driving through it at that hour. The light filters through the branches, casting weird, spidery shadows across the road. We were chatting about something. I don't even remember what. And suddenly we both just stopped talking. It was like the air had shifted. The curve in the road ahead seemed sharper than usual, the trees darker. I don't know why, but I felt this chill creep up my spine. As we rounded the bend, I froze. Just above the tree line, there were buildings, skyscrapers, tall, looming, metallic. They gleamed faintly in the weak morning light, like they were reflecting something. Moonlight, maybe. But that didn't make sense. The sun was rising. Mark slowed the car, his knuckles going white on the steering wheel. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unable to speak. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. It didn't make sense. We were miles from the city. You couldn't even see the skyline from here. And even if you could, it wouldn't look like that. These weren't normal skyscrapers. They were too tall, too thin, almost alien in design. They didn't belong. I blinked. Just like that, they were gone. Mark slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding a little on the damp pavement. We sat there in stunned silence, staring at the spot where the buildings had been. It was just trees now, the same dense forest we'd driven past 100 times before. Nothing out of the ordinary. No sign that anything had been there at all. "Did you see it?" Mark said again, more urgently this time. "Yes," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "I saw it." Neither of us moved for what felt like an eternity. The car idled, the heater blowing faintly, but I felt cold all over. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the light, maybe some strange reflection, but it didn't explain how we both saw the same thing. And it didn't explain the way those buildings looked. Imposing, unnatural, like they didn't belong in this world. Mark finally put the car in gear and drove the rest of the way to the park. We didn't talk about it, not then. The silence between us felt heavy, like we were both afraid that saying it out loud would make it real. When we got to the park, we walked the trails as we always did. But the air felt different that morning. Heavy, still. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. We haven't taken that road again since. Story 7. I'm not one for long drives anymore, but back then, I thought I could handle anything. I was cocky, thought I'd power through a 24-hour drive like it was no big deal. Looking back now, I know it was reckless. I'm sharing this because I learned a hard lesson, and maybe someone else needs to hear it. I'd been moving across states for a new job. The plan was to drive straight through from Nebraska to Arizona with nothing but Monster energy drinks and beef jerky to keep me going. Dumb? Absolutely. But when you're younger and trying to save a buck, you convince yourself it's doable. The first half of the drive wasn't bad. I passed through Colorado during the day, and honestly, it was kind of nice. The mountains were a welcome distraction, and the weather held up. By the time I hit New Mexico, though, it was late, and things started to feel different. There's something about the emptiness of New Mexico at night that gets under your skin. It's not like other states where you pass through little towns every few miles. Out there, it's just dark. Endless dark. And the towns, when you find them, feel wrong. Like they exist in their own time. I was somewhere near Tucumcari when my gas light came on. I'd been keeping an eye on the gauge, but it still snuck up on me. I was tired, jittery from the caffeine, and starting to second-guess whether I could make the trip in one go. My phone had no signal, so GPS was useless. I knew I needed gas, and soon. Finally, I saw the glowing Chevron sign in the distance. Relief flooded me. I pulled off the highway and into the station. That's when things got weird. The first thing I noticed was how dark it was. The sign and the towering Chevron logo were lit, sure, but the rest of the station was pitch black. No lights at the pumps, no glow from the convenience store windows, just shadows. I thought maybe the lights had gone out, but even the coolers inside the store were dark. I parked near the pump, left my truck running, and got out. The air was still. Too still. No wind, no sounds, nothing. My footsteps on the pavement echoed like I was in a tunnel. I glanced at the store again, and my stomach dropped. The windows were covered in a thick layer of grime, but I could see shapes inside. Not people, shapes. Tall, unmoving things like mannequins. I told myself it was just a trick of the shadows, but my gut was screaming at me to leave. Then I heard it, a faint metallic scraping sound coming from the side of the station. I froze, my hand hovering over the gas pump. It wasn't rhythmic, like a machine, but uneven, like someone dragging something heavy across the pavement. I turned slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady. The scraping stopped. I squinted into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. just the dim outline of the station and the glow of the chevron sign above me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. Stupid, I know, but silence felt worse. Nothing. And then, from behind the station, I saw movement. A figure stepped into view, just barely illuminated by the sign's light. It was a man. At least, I think it was a man. He was tall, with long, wiry limbs, and his head tilted at an unnatural angle, like he was trying to see me from a different perspective. He didn't move closer, just stood there, swaying slightly. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in the truck, but my legs wouldn't move. I was locked in place, staring at him, waiting for him to do something, anything. Then he smiled. I swear to God it wasn't a normal smile. It stretched too wide, showing teeth that didn't belong in a human mouth. I stumbled back, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the pump handle. I wasn't thinking straight. I just wanted gas so I could leave. And then the lights came on. Not all at once, but in a slow, flickering sequence. First the pumps, then the store. The coolers inside buzzed to life, casting a cold white glow on the windows. But the man? He was gone. I looked around frantically, but there was no sign of him. Just the empty lot, the hum of the gas station lights, and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I didn't even finish pumping. I got maybe 3 gallons in before I yanked the nozzle out, jumped back in the truck, and peeled out of there. My tires squealed as I hit the highway, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. I kept expecting to see headlights behind me, or worse, that man's face appearing in the mirror. But the road stayed empty. Still, I didn't stop. Not until I was well past Albuquerque, where I found a brightly lit, busy truck stop. I parked near the entrance and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was just my exhaustion playing tricks on me. Maybe it was something else. All I know is, I'll never forget the way that place felt. Like it wasn't supposed to be there. Like it was waiting for someone like me. That was the last time I drove through New Mexico at night. Hell, it was the last time I attempted a 24-hour drive. Some things just aren't worth the risk. And if you ever find yourself low on gas in the middle of nowhere, take my advice. Keep driving. Story 8. I'll never forget what happened that night. My name is Nate, and I live in a quiet suburb just outside Pittsburgh. Nothing extraordinary ever happens here until last year. You see, there's this road just 1 block from mine, Maplewood Avenue. It looks like any other suburban street, but since the accident, I can't go near it without my stomach nodding. The accident happened a year ago in October. A motorcyclist ran a stop sign late at night and got hit by a pickup truck. He didn't make it. Everyone in the neighborhood talked about it for weeks. His name was Justin, and he was only 26. The kind of guy people would describe as full of life. After that, I noticed some people avoided the intersection altogether, myself included, until I got a new job that required me to drive past it every night on my way home. It started out subtle. I worked the graveyard shift, so I'd usually be driving home at around 3 a.m. Every time I approached the intersection, I'd feel off. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like a pressure, heavy in the air, like the atmosphere itself tightened around me. I'd get this prickling sensation at the back of my neck, and I'd catch myself glancing in the rearview mirror more than usual. But nothing ever happened, so I wrote it off as my imagination. Then came New Year's Eve. I had volunteered for an extra shift because I didn't have plans, and the drive home was quiet as always. Snow covered the streets in patches, and the city was unusually still. I had my music on, just loud enough to drown out the silence, when I approached Maplewood. As soon as I got near the intersection, the energy shifted. I don't know how else to explain it. It felt like walking into a freezer, only the cold wasn't on my skin. It was in my chest. My breath caught, but I told myself it was nothing, just my nerves. And then the music stopped, not paused, not skipped, just stopped. Dead silence filled the car, and for a split second, I thought maybe my phone had died. I glanced at the screen, but it was fine. That's when I heard it. A voice. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't faint either. Clear as day, it came through the speakers. "Don't!" I slammed on the brakes without thinking. My heart was pounding so hard I couldn't hear anything else. I sat there, frozen, staring at the intersection in front of me. The streetlights cast long shadows across the snow, and for a moment I thought I saw something move. A flicker, like someone stepping back into the dark. I grabbed my phone, thinking maybe it was a notification or a video playing by accident, but the screen was blank. No calls, no messages, nothing. The music hadn't even restarted. My breathing was ragged, and my palms were slick on the wheel. I couldn't shake the voice. It was low, almost gravelly, and there was something in the way it said that single word that made my blood run cold. Don't. Don't what? Don't stop. Don't go. I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't sit there any longer. I pressed the gas and drove through the intersection as fast as I could, my eyes darting to every shadow. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I told myself it was just a glitch, some weird coincidence. But deep down, I didn't believe that. A few days later, I mentioned it to my friend Mike, and his reaction made my skin crawl. "Dude," he said, leaning forward, "you know that's where Justin died, right? Like, exactly there." I hadn't thought about it until then. Story 9. I was stationed in Germany back in 2012. Small town, quiet, middle of nowhere vibes. You know the type. I was posted at a base a couple of kilometers outside town, but I'd spend weekends at this little hotel not too far away. Sometimes you just need to disconnect from the guys on base, you know? Anyway, that night, probably mid-October, chilly but not freezing, I decided to take a back road back to base after dinner at the hotel. It was just me, my old Volkswagen Golf, and the kind of stillness you only get in places like that. The highway would have been faster, sure, but the back road was quieter, more scenic, and something about the isolation felt good. Or at least it usually did. The route took me through this tiny town, the kind of place where all the houses are half-timbered and the streets are cobblestones. I remember checking my speed because the speed limit was ridiculously low, like 30 kph, and the last thing I wanted was some local cop pulling me over. The streets were empty, dead quiet. Even for that time of night, it felt off. Usually there'd be a porch light on or a dog barking in the distance, but there was nothing. Just the sound of my tires crunching over the cobblestones. Then, as I was coming up on this old church in the middle of the town, something caught my eye. At first I thought it was a shadow or maybe a trick of the light. You know how old churches have those tall spires or whatever they're called? Well, on one of those near the top, something was moving. It was perched there like a gargoyle or a crow, but it wasn't either of those, it was bigger. I slowed down instinctively, my foot easing off the gas, trying to get a better look. That's when it jumped. I swear to God, it leaped from the top of the spire straight down to the sidewalk below. My stomach dropped. You ever see something so unnatural that your brain just stops working for a second? Like it's trying to figure out what the hell you just saw? That's what happened to me. It landed on the cobblestones without making a sound, just crouching there in the dim light of a nearby street lamp. And then it looked at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The thing wasn't human, but it wasn't an animal either. It was hunched over, almost crawling, but its limbs were all wrong. Too long, too thin. The way it turned its head to look at me was the worst part. It was jerky, almost like it was imitating how people move, but hadn't quite figured it out yet. Its eyes. Jesus. I'll never forget those eyes. They weren't glowing or anything like you'd expect in some horror story. They were just black, empty, like looking into two bottomless pits. Before I could process anything, it started moving. Fast, on two legs but still low to the ground, like it was stalking prey. It darted across the street right in front of my car, and I slammed on the brakes so hard my seatbelt locked. I thought it was going to come right for me, but instead it went straight for the cemetery wall across the street. The wall had to be at least 15 feet high, maybe more. No way any person, or animal for that matter, could climb it, especially not in one jump. But this thing didn't even hesitate. It just leaped, claws digging into the stone as it scrambled up in one fluid motion. By the time it reached the top, it turned back to look at me again. I swear it was grinning. Or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. My brain was screaming at me to go, to get the hell out of there. But I couldn't stop staring. Then it tilted its head like it was listening for something. And that's when I heard it. This low, guttural growl, but not from the thing. It was coming from behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I didn't want to see whatever else might have been there. I just slammed my foot on the gas and took off. The Golf's tires screeched against the cobblestones as I sped through the empty streets. I didn't care about the speed limit anymore. I didn't care about anything except getting as far away from that town as possible. The drive back to base felt like it took hours. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the car steady. I didn't look in the rearview mirror once, not even when I got onto the highway. Whatever that thing was, I didn't want to risk seeing it again. When I finally got back to base, I parked the car and ran straight to my room. Didn't bother locking the door, didn't bother undressing. I just jumped into bed and pulled the covers over my head like a damn kid. I didn't sleep a second that night. I've never taken that back road again. Hell, I don't even like driving at night anymore. Story 10. I'll never forget that night on the A7 in France. I had just finished a long day of driving through the winding, dark highways. My car was low on gas, and I had planned to stop at the next service station. But as the hours dragged on, the road started feeling eerily empty. It was just after midnight when I saw it. I was coming up on a stretch of road that was dimly lit, just a few scattered lamps along the side, casting faint pools of light. It was quiet, too quiet, and I hadn't seen another car for what felt like forever. The only thing keeping me company was the hum of my engine and the dull glow of my headlights. Out of nowhere, I saw the headlights of another car approaching. It wasn't that unusual. People drive at odd hours, especially in a country like France. But something was off about this car. It was coming straight at me, but it wasn't on the correct side of the road. It was on the wrong side of the barrier, weaving across the lanes. I stared at it, unsure whether I was seeing things. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I had that weird feeling like something wasn't quite right. The car was speeding toward me, and I could make out nothing but the headlights. No taillights, no indication of which direction it was really coming from. It was as if it wasn't even a car, just these glaring lights moving across the road like a ghost. I slowed down, instinctively moving toward the right side of the road, trying to give this lunatic enough space. But I couldn't take my eyes off it. It didn't make sense. Why wasn't it pulling over? Why was it driving like that? There were no other cars, just the two of us on this stretch of highway. And then the strange part hit me. The only lights I could see were the ones inside the car. Just the faint yellow glow from inside the cabin. Nothing from the headlights. No exterior lights. No sign of any sort of reflection off the windshield. I could feel my heart race. I told myself I was tired, that I was seeing things. But something deep inside told me that wasn't it. The car kept coming. Closer. Closer. Holy shit, I muttered under my breath, trying to make sense of it all. My fingers were sweating, gripping the steering wheel so tight I thought my knuckles would burst. I sped up, my foot slamming harder onto the gas, trying to pull away. But it was like this car was attached to me, coming right after me no matter how much faster I went. I glanced into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something behind me, but it was all just darkness. And then, before I knew it, the car passed me. But it wasn't just a car passing, it was something else. The headlights blinked, then the whole car swerved as if it had no control. I couldn't make out a face inside, just shadows shifting in the cabin. And that was when I felt it. A chill creeping up my spine, a sudden weight of dread that hung in the air. My stomach twisted as I watched the car get further away from me. It was still on the wrong side of the road, still going in the opposite direction, and yet it didn't seem to slow down at all. It was like a nightmare. This thing, moving too fast, not even following the rules of the road. I stared at the taillights as it disappeared into the dark. I shook my head, breathing hard. Was I losing it? I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. My palms were sweating. I couldn't explain what had just happened. I tried to laugh it off, but even that didn't feel right. Then just as quickly as it had all started, the car was gone. Vanished. There was no sign of it, no more headlights, no sound of an engine. Just me, alone on the highway. I drove for another 10 minutes, my mind racing, the wheels of my car now almost silently gliding over the road. I was trying to forget about the whole thing, but then I saw it again. The lights, just ahead. This time I slammed my foot on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. The lights were there, but this time they were ahead of me, just off to the side of the road. And it wasn't just the glow from the car's headlights. It was something else. The lights were dim and flickering, barely visible through the thick shadows of the trees. For a moment I thought I might have imagined it, that I had just been overly paranoid. But then it happened again. The car, that same shape, driving on the wrong side of the road. But this time, I saw it more clearly. It wasn't just on the wrong side of the barrier. It was coming straight at me again, as though it had circled back, as if it was following me. I don't know what I was thinking, but I floored the gas pedal. I had to get out of there. I couldn't shake the feeling that this thing wasn't just some lost driver. It was something more. Something wrong. I glanced over my shoulder, praying that I would see a sign of the car turning off or pulling away, but nothing. The only thing I saw was the glow in the distance, getting closer. The road was so dark I could barely make out anything beyond the reach of my headlights. My heart hammered against my chest. There was no way out. I was trapped. I could hear my breath in the silence, the soft hum of my car speeding faster and faster, but it wasn't enough. I could feel the presence of that other car closing in, the sound of its engine so faint it was almost imperceptible. I kept praying it wasn't real, that I would just wake up from this nightmare. And then, nothing. It just stopped. I don't know if it turned off the road, if it had vanished into thin air, or if I had simply blacked out for a second. But when I looked behind me, the road was empty. Not a single trace of that car was left. Just the highway, dark and silent. I don't know what happened. I don't want to know. All I know is that when I finally found a gas station hours later, I pulled in and never looked back. And I haven't driven that stretch of road again. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.